Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Before we get into that last controversial topic, the N word, narcissistic. So that is thrown out a lot. And I will say I dated two men that were clinically diagnosed, and we went to therapy together and all of that. And I think people might have traits, but that doesn't necessarily mean someone is a narcissist. I didn't diagnose them with that. That's, but do you think that people are using that word because someone triggers them or they disagree, or what is the nuance here? Yes, narcissism is real. Is it as common as we think? Are we learning these behaviors? So many nuances. What do you think about this?
I think there's an overuse of the word narcissism in general. I think a lot of people in a lot of ways are becoming much more extreme in their language, in their politics online, partially because extremism does better. So it's promoted in Facebook and Meta and TikTok, etc. So calling someone a narcissist used to be like, oh my God, a narcissist. Now it's like, oh, it's like lost its meaning because it's getting overused. I think clinically, like less than 1 in 1,000 people are a narcissist, but there is a narcissistic spectrum of like truly diagnosed narcissist who doesn't care about people at all, has like zero emotional capacity for people, and basically can do anything and not care how people are reacting. There could be someone like dying or crying, and they just wouldn't really have any emotional feeling or reaction. And a lot of those true narcissists, super rare type, are very much a victim of trauma themselves.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate it perpetuates it. A broken household, abuse of various kinds, physical, verbal abuse, etc. And so that's tough. But I think everybody else on that spectrum is oftentimes gets labeled as a narcissist. So I feel like it'd be more healthy to say like, oh, someone is extremely selfish, or they have narcissistic tendencies, or they're on the spectrum. And a lot of CEOs, doctors, highly trained surgeons, and athletes are somewhat narcissistic because they have to be somewhat selfish to focus on their business, their craft, their profession in order to do really well. And narcissists are typically very charming. They can be a little manipulative, sometimes not even on purpose. Mm-hmm. But a lot of social media influencers can be somewhat on the narcissistic spectrum as well. And narcissists tend to have major issues with feeling worthy, with self-esteem, with caring what people think. And that does well in the social media space, honestly. Mm-hmm. But I think in many instances, you get the classic example of like a couple or a married couple that's not getting along, and one person wants and needs are not being met, and the other person's wants and needs are not being met. And rather than having a healthy discussion early on about what that is and how to navigate that space. And side note, I think it's good practice for relationships to discuss conflict or the things you disagree on a fairly regular basis. But a lot of times that disagreement and conflict doesn't happen. And so it boils underneath the surface and doesn't get addressed until both sides become unhappy, distressful, unwell, and somebody might cheat, or somebody might say something really mean, or they just start to not appreciate or respect each other. And so then that person feels like the other person isn't meeting their wants and needs, so they sort of get more selfish or more self-centered, and it just sort of like polarizes the couple. And rather than saying like, oh, my partner is selfish or narcissistic, you could say like, well, how am I not meeting their wants and needs? What are their wants and needs? And what are my wants and needs? Maybe my partner thinks that I'm selfish, and maybe they're not able to meet them, or maybe I need to get them from somewhere else. We're also in a place too where we expect our partners or the people we follow to be perfect. We expect them to meet all of our needs, which is ridiculous. We've lost a lot of community. We've lost a lot of friendships. And we're relying on our partners to fill those spaces rather than trying to gain more relationships from friends and family. And so I think if a lot of people were to be a little bit more open-minded about people with different political backgrounds or people with different ethnicities, cultures, beliefs of all kinds of different faith beliefs, I think we'd be able to have a wider network of friends, community, family, and be a little more understanding of ourselves and of each other.
Definitely. And to add on to that, toxic and unhealthy doesn't mean someone is a narcissist. But if you're in a relationship with a true narcissist, it's probably going to be toxic and unhealthy. So I think people use those interchangeably, but just because it's not a healthy relationship, it doesn't automatically mean someone's a narcissist. That is my take on it.
Correct. And even labels like, like toxic, or what's the other one? Gaslighting get misused or overused a lot of times. Like if someone, I see this a lot in the online space, someone will try to say that someone is incorrect and they're like, you're gaslighting me. It's like, well, we're just trying to understand, like we're trying to figure out what's right or what's true or, what's actually accurate in the situation. So like, just because gaslighting is terrible, I don't want to like downplay narcissism or toxic relationships or gaslighting. And I think there's a lot of that that's currently happening. But if you use it in the wrong instance, it does lose its meaning. So just if you say something, let's try to think of an example. Like if someone was saying, like I had a juice reaction, or like someone tries to, if I say my dog had a reaction to the juice and, someone else says like, that's impossible, he just had a rare genetic bone disease, I'd be like, that's interesting. Maybe he did have a bone disease genetically. Like, let's test him for that. But I could say like, you're gaslighting me, that trying to say that like, that's not true. And someone could be legitimately trying to say like, maybe a child or a dog didn't have a juice reaction. Maybe it was just coincidence. And it gets into a gray area of like, is it cause? Is it correlation? Is it coincidence? But either way, I think someone saying like, hey, maybe what you're saying isn't accurate, isn't necessarily gaslighting. Gaslighting is typically something where in a relationship, somebody is trying to make you believe that you're crazy, that your perception of the world is inaccurate, and trying to make you think that you're stupid or that your experience of the world is not possibly true.
Yeah. And, whether you're in a relationship with someone that you would consider any of those qualities that we just described or has any of those tendencies, if that's a pattern, we have to look at ourselves. So I was in therapy and the therapist said, you're the common denominator here. What within you is attracting a certain type of person? And I'm like, oh, wait, it's about them being bad, right? So, in trauma, or I would say I did experience a good amount of sexual trauma and other things that once I got old enough to realize the things that I was doing were so inappropriate and they were published behind a paywall and all that, I carried so much shame. I hated myself and I looked for love in the wrong places. So I wasn't properly vetting people. I wasn't looking at myself as a high value woman. I was kind of, he has a good job, handsome. All right, this will work. And I was so focused on superficial things, and I did experience superficial relationships. And I am so excited for you because you are newly engaged. So congratulations.
Thank you. Took a lot of work to get here, dealing with my own relationship patterns. Yeah.
And it's never to bash people from our past. Every relationship helps us grow. Sometimes they don't always end the best way. As listeners know, Otto and I, we split in January, did not think we were going to get back together. And we were very codependent. And I think that was the energetic shift that allowed us to be our own people for once and then try it from a different place. But yeah, we all have things that we can do better. So what were the things, if you feel comfortable sharing, how did you meet your fiancé? And what were things that you worked on that have allowed you to have a happy, fulfilling relationship that you are in today?
Yeah. What were things that I worked on? So I met her a couple years ago. She was actually with someone else at the time, and we had an instant connection, but we both knew she was with somebody, so did nothing to act on it. And, at the time, actually, she liked me enough to try to set me up with her best friend, and I wasn't really that interested for whatever reason. So I never really responded. I was like, thank you. I'll reach out if I'm interested, kind of thing. And never did that because I was like, I basically met her and was like, wow, all the good ones are gone. I guess I'm going to have to settle. And for me, I'm like, I'm glad I didn't settle because I reached back a couple of years later and, things were different. She was available. So we started dating about a year ago and just have had the best time ever since. It's just felt really easy. It's one of those things where it's like when you know, and you know early on. And we just knew that we were meant to be in each other's lives and we're just a really good match for each other, which has been a major blessing. But it has taken a lot of work for me to not have superficial relationships, I guess, like you were saying. That wasn't necessarily like my pattern. My pattern was more of like the saving, helping type of like Disney movie thing. It's like save the stranded, wounded princess kind of thing. Or trying to help someone out who needed some of that because it made me feel good about myself to help them. So I had some toxic, some abusive partners who were not kind to me physically, verbally, multiple times. And so I had to look at myself and say, like, why am I attracting these types of people? Part of it was because my parents didn't have a super healthy relationship when I was growing up. So that's what I knew to be like what a relationship was. And to me, I guess that's what my patient told me this week, which I knew, but they said in a really fun way. They said, don't confuse peace and boredom. And for me, a healthy relationship felt boring, and an unhealthy relationship, before.
Okay.
And so for me, like a healthy, stable relationship felt boring. To me, like a good relationship back then was like something fun, something fiery, where there's a little bit of like heat between you. It wasn't even like active conflict, but there was like an implied tension, like physically, whatever it was. Like those people, I think, just had a little bit of like internal anger or a little bit of internal fire. And for me, that was exciting. Like it was a little bit of an adrenaline inducing experience to be with somebody who was maybe unstable somehow. And it wasn't even like they were acting or saying anything unstable, but I could just feel it internally inside of them. So for me, it was like either being able to wrangle that or help them in some way was, I think what I was looking for on some level. And that's what I was attracted to, was people who were a little bit edgy or not boring in my sense. And it's not that my current partner is boring by any means, far from it. But I think for me, slowing down, getting a little bit less of the adrenaline type of relationships. I did a lot of long distance relationships to heal some old abandonment wounds. So it was like healing an abandonment wound, and I was pretty much only dating long distance. So it was like that long distance in of itself is also a little bit unstable. Like there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of intensity when you're with someone for like 1 week out of the month or 2 weekends out of the month. So I think it was like when there was less pressure, less intensity, for me, that felt like I'm not even attracted. So I had to choose to do not long distance. I had to choose people who I knew were more respectable, more stable. And I did a lot of internal subconscious clearing with NET and acupuncture and some therapy. And things started to shift, but it was slow because like I was literally attracted to the wrong type of person.
Yeah. That's very interesting you say that, because I have always felt more comfortable in not safe love. And same thing, boring. Oh, so boring.
Right.
Peace felt uncomfortable to me. Or it was, and Otto and I speak a lot about this. He grew up in a very chaotic household and he needs a lot of stimulation. So we have to do one of two things. Well, maybe there are more options, but either learn to do our inner work to feel more comfortable in less stimuli, or we will subconsciously, unconsciously create that chaos so that our nervous system feels what is familiar. And when he owned that, I'm like, thank goodness, and I have my own things too, but I was bored with that. And so we're trying to figure out, what does stable love look like? What does being our own healthy individual look like? And so what would you say are some of the best things about the relationship you're in? They're never perfect, but what do you value the most about your partner?
I think that we can be, now it's the opposite. It's like we can be stable for each other. If she's having an off day or I'm having an off day, we can be there for each other and hold space for each other in a way that feels nurturing and loving. So I've been in past relationships where when I was having a tough time, they would say like, just suck it up, or like be a man, or like whatever. Or if I was feeling a certain way, I would get shamed or guilted for feeling that way. And or somebody would try to fix that, right? Or I would try to fix their emotions. So I think it's learning to be comfortable holding space for your own emotional diversity, and then holding space for other people's emotions where you're not trying to fix them, but just being there to hold them, to listen, to shut up and just, love them, really. So much of the time, men are trying to stop women from crying, or women don't want to cry, but it's like being comfortable crying, feeling the deep feelings, expressing and communicating all those things in a safe space. You don't want to do it on the first date or maybe even the fifth date, but feeling comfortable and safe is really, really important. So I feel super comfortable, super safe, and have tons of respect for my partner. Past partners, I think, would sometimes lie, cheat, steal in small ways, which for me were those like mini red flags. And I think just holding you and your partner, knowing you're not perfect, but holding yourself to a high esteem, and I think like keeping each other not responsible, keeping each other, maybe keep each other responsible to say like, hey, that doesn't seem like the best version of yourself. How can you maybe like mitigate that or manage that a little bit better?
Yeah. Another question I had from the audience is that they wanted you to speak about faith, because that's not something that you talked about before. And I saw somewhere that you and your fiance go to church together, and that it seems like you're living, I don't want to say a slower paced life, but less stimuli, more focus on the things that matter. What are those things to you? And was faith always a part of your life? You just didn't talk about it. Did you take a step away and then came back? Like, what has that been like for you?
I was raised as a Creaster kid. Christmas and Easter was like the two church services that I went to. My parents were raised in the church. I was never officially baptized until about a year ago. It was always something that was intriguing. I read a lot of books in colleges on agnosticism, atheism, Richard Dawkins, and books like that on whether or not church religion was worth doing. That was when I also studied abroad in Ireland, and there was the big scandal back then when that was coming out about all the priests diddling little boys, which was a really hard thing for the Catholic Church. But I actually was intuitively drawn to Catholicism. When I was living in Ireland, I would go to the church. There would be like a 30, 40-minute service. The kids were like playing and running up in the aisles. The priests were super gregarious and friendly and funny. And then everyone would walk and follow the priest down the block to the pub where there were 200 Guinnesses waiting for the priest and everyone else to drink. So it was like a huge community thing. It was like super fun. Everyone would go to the little church service, and then they'd walk down to the pub a block away. I dated someone for a while who was Catholic. So for me, now I'm actually becoming Catholic. And it's partially because my partner grew up Catholic. And I've always been searching for a church that I felt comfortable in. And I realized it's less about the church itself and more about the community. For me, that's really important. My parents, I really love their church as well, which is a non-denominational church. Similar like Unitarian or the Baha'i faith. Well, the Baha'i is its own thing, but similar to Unitarian Universalism or pluralistic type of religions, it's very accepting, and they practice on the beach, which is great, usually just after sunrise in Lake Bluff, Illinois. And again, like their community and the pastors there are wonderful people. And I've seen churches as a kid that were terrible to me and my family, that like shamed and guilted us for not donating or not donating enough or not being baptized and things like that. And so a lot of people have tons of shame, guilt, Catholic guilt, or like other issues with the church. And I think it's important to not confuse terrible people with a terrible concept or idea. And whether someone has spirituality or any type of faith or a religion in their life, I think it's important to not lose that for too long. And the main reason I started talking about it a little bit during the pandemic was because people were having a major issue with themes, concepts of life and death. Their philosophy of life was like really poor. And we were seeing this a lot with people who were afraid of death, afraid of dying, didn't know about an afterlife, didn't know about what truly mattered. And the pandemic changed a lot of people's sense of purpose and who they are and what they are and a belief or not in a higher power. So whatever someone's church or religious beliefs are, I think is extremely important. I've had a lot of my patients who are Orthodox Jewish try to convert me to Judaism because I'm technically Jewish because my mom's mom was Jewish. And I almost considered doing that for a period of time. But I think exploring that aspect of yourself is extremely important because it makes you, I think this is why plant medicine is so powerful right now. I'm a little bit anti-plant medicine at the moment because I think people are finding their God in plant medicine. Mm-hmm. And this is going to trigger some people, but one of my patients told me this, and I think it's really important to think about in your life after this podcast. And it's the concept of who or what is your God? Is it ayahuasca, plant medicine, psilocybin? Is it drugs, pharmaceuticals? Is it the juices is it your doctors? Is it the hospital system? Is it money? Is it aesthetics? Is it looks? Is it your partner? Is it your relationship? Is your God God? Is your God your house? Like, what do you care the most about? And I have not answered that question for myself yet, but it is one that I think is very interesting to say, like, what do you truly love, respect, care about the most? And what is your priority of value systems? A lot of people, even myself, I think for a while, like health and natural health and healing was my God. And I think it is very beneficial for people to have something beyond themselves that they have a respect, a reverence, and an awe for, whether it's science, whether science could be your God, it could be Mother Nature, it could be nature is your God. That's totally fine. It could be aesthetics, it could be money. Like at this point in your life, maybe you're just like 25 and hustling and you want to make a bunch of money. But I think it's important to say, like, these are the things that I value. And I would just say for myself and many other influencers, whether you have 10,000 followers, 100,000 or a million, happiness does not come from achieving or attaining. It comes from loving the process and your belief system, your mental health and your belief system about like who you are and why you're here. And I think spirituality is where we get those things. And for some, plant medicine provides a lot of that. I think psilocybin and different plant medicines have a place and a role, and they can be very profoundly healing. But I've seen a lot of people like Aubrey Marcus and others where it was like the sex was their God and open relationships was their God. And then plant medicine was their God. And they kind of moved beyond those things. And so I think at the end of the day, we're all looking for something, some place to grow, to learn, to evolve, to change. And spirituality is just one aspect of our overall value systems. But it is an important one that is often left out in the medical practice. But I usually have talks with my patients about some of these bigger existential concepts. I'm not talking about religion and faith. I keep my practice very secular, but I think having some belief system is profoundly healing.
Yeah. So I'm 36, when I was 28, I didn't believe in God. I was raised Catholic and I saw a lot of priests that were leaders, but I didn't think that they were living in integrity. And there was evidence of that, money, sexual things, whatnot. I didn't feel like I was so bad as a teen, I suppose. I felt shame every time I walked in there. It didn't feel like forgiveness, but I'm very grateful for my grandmother because she's very devout Catholic, never made me feel judged. She knew, people had abortions and she's just like, they need our love. And she doesn't support that. She's very against it, but there's so much judgment. There's so much like all or nothing thinking. And, Jesus was the person who took care of the lepers and he was not too good for anybody. And so a lot of people who are faith-based are truly doing it for the right reasons. And it felt for me like it was more of a show when I was younger. But all that to say, when I was 28, I hit such a rock bottom. I didn't pray for at least 20 years, taken massive amounts of Adderall, like 40 milligrams a day, Klonopin, like Wellbutrin, you name it, I was on it. And I just sat there outside of this hospital before work one day and I cried and I said, God, I don't know if you're here, But if you are, they say God won't give us more than we can handle. And I don't know how much more I can handle. And a lot changed after that. And it's like, if we don't ask, how are we going to be guided? And it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, and things happened that I could have never imagined. And I'm so grateful. So for people who aren't believers in God or a higher power, maybe ask for that to be shown to you. And it's not going to be like, yo, it's God, I got a billboard. Like, it's very subtle. And I've heard the saying, prayer is when we talk to God. Meditation is where God talks to us. Do you practice meditation? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think meditating is really, really helpful. I do practice different forms of meditation, like walking meditations. I'll meditate sometimes when I do like float, not cold plunging, but like go to a float center and do a float in a super salty float tank. But I think for people who think like, "Ooh, I hate meditating," or "I'm really bad at it," those are typically the people who need it more than anybody else. And I could get into that, but I do think we all have the capacity to connect to God. A lot of people say God is love, or love is God. So a lot of people view like love as their God, or they view other things as their God. But I think, I'm just like a newbie. So I don't feel like I'm a professional talking about religion.
Yeah,
it's like,
it's
this is
just
new for me.
yours.
But my personal belief is that many people view God in the holistic community as like either universal intelligence. They view it as nature, Mother Earth, Gaia. They view it as like what plant medicine connects them to about like the universe, the interconnectedness of all things. Some view as God. And I think God can also be like the collective unconscious, sort of like the universal intelligence, or like a collective unconscious, sort of like Avatar with like Earth and us connecting to Earth, Mother Earth, how we're all interconnected and we're all our own unique being. We're all connected. And so however you personally view like the universe or Mother Nature or this higher entity of order, I think it's important to at least contemplate it on a regular basis and try to connect to that. Mm-hmm. And different cultures, different religions have belief systems around the specifics. But I think as long as you're doing something to connect to a higher power outside of yourself, that's really important. And for some people, that's just like, they think that it's all in their brain and their subconscious, and that's totally fine. Their genetics, like the physical being. But there's a reason why almost every scientist starts to believe in faith. They start to see beauty in a higher order in science. And it's usually not in college. It's usually much later in their life. But like the more experiences people have, they have things that they can't explain that are super profound, that have awe and inspiration and a higher order and a higher understanding. And I think that's where that comes in.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And it doesn't have to look like what it looks like for someone else. And I'm grateful that you acknowledge different cultures, because I just think that maybe it's like language. There are different ways to connect with a higher power and to pray, but I just don't believe, you're bad if you live in a different part of the world and haven't been exposed to things. I just think that we all have a lot more in common. We focus on our differences, why we have to be right. But what I'm hearing from you is certainly more love-based, and it's there to help us gain a perspective, to be grateful, to connect to something that's greater. When I deal with depression, I'm not connected with my purpose. And I ask myself, have I been praying? No, I haven't. I'm focused on all this silly, stupid stuff. So it's very powerful, and even for health.
Yeah. For sure.
Okay. So last two questions. A lot of people wanted to know about subconscious mind healing. You mentioned the NET emotional technique. Do you have to be in person for that? And are there any other modalities that you resonate with, and or things that people could do at home?
Yeah. So clearing your subconscious is kind of like the secret sauce to healing, because that's where your limiting beliefs are and old feelings that are keeping you trapped in the same patterns. And the real solution is a little bit cheesy of a phrase, but it is feel it to heal it. You really do have to feel the negative emotion in order to let it go. There's a book, Letting Go by David Hawkins, which helps people do that on their own. and you can kind of NET yourself. NET as a technique, neuro-emotional technique, is amazing, but it's only taught to body work practitioners or therapists, doctors who can do laying on of the hands. And so NET, you technically have to get in person, but I sometimes joke around with people, you can NET yourself, because it's basically like you try to figure out what the root cause emotion is, where it came from. You kind of like therapize yourself a little bit. And what you do is you sort of like feel into whatever the biggest stress is. And you ask yourself like, well, why am I angry? Is there a deeper level to the anger or the fear or the sadness? Is there grief? Is there loss of love? Whatever it is, maybe there's like a frustration. And so you feel into why that is. You can journal about it or just think it. And you allow yourself space to feel it without pushing it away, without consciously like changing it or trying to reframe it in your head. You allow yourself to feel that negative emotion for a period of time, and eventually it washes away, just like a big wave would splash on the shore. It's like going to be really intense. It's going to splash. You're going to feel messy. You might cry. Feeling it might make you shake or tremble, but usually you can regulate yourself back to normal, to a calm. And so you just like put one hand wherever you feel it in your body, and you put your other hand on your head or your heart, and you just sort of breathe in good, positive white light, air, and energy, and breathe out some of that negative stress feeling. Mm-hmm. And it sounds really simple, but when you're stressed, when you're charged, when someone triggers you or you get bothered, something's irritating you, there's major change in your life, you feel out of control, you're like, let me dive into that out of control feeling or the bothered feeling, and just allow yourself to feel bothered for a bit. Because we're excellent escape artists as people. We're excellent at distracting ourselves or numbing ourselves out, whether it's with like pornography, whether it's with TV, whether it's with like a partner or an app or our phone or screens or sports or a book, whatever it is. We're really great at avoiding the pain. A lot of people start when on their healing journey, they know what they want to manifest, but they are using that to kind of like avoid their pain points. And when you learn to really manifest you well, you learn to start to feel into the positive emotion of what you want to manifest and like feel it. You really have to feel the positivity to manifest, and you really have to feel the negativity in order to let go of old patterns. So NET, neuroemotional technique, is a great technique. You can search for a practitioner at netmindbody.com. I also have a stress post in some of my story highlights on stress and mental health that helps people to find other types of practitioners, therapists who do somatic trauma release. So EMDR and other forms of somatic release are really important because they're bringing up the feeling that's in the body to be released. So SESP, NARM, NARM, and EMDR are kind of the acronyms. That there's others that exist, but basically they're trauma-informed, nervous system-informed practitioners who can help actually find those root cause feelings and emotions from childhood, from your parents, maybe they're inherited or their current time. And you just have to feel into it, hold space for them, and they'll usually start to dissipate after doing it. And you know you're doing it right when if you do it 2 or 3 times, then that feeling or emotional state should start to lessen in your life overall.
Very well said. So a tool that I use at home doing exactly this, because I tried EMDR, I struggled with it because they would say, where do you feel it in your body? I'm like, I don't know. I'm in my head. I've never, I don't feel anything. I mean, if you poke my stomach. So I struggled with that. And then I got more mad that I couldn't do it. Have you ever heard of Orpheus Mind Tech?
No, not yet.
Okay. I really, really love it. It's something I got in a couple years ago where it was $25 a month. So it's gone up since, but they're trying to get it certified as like a medical device. But I will take my phone and put in headphones, and you think about, I do it a lot with anger because, you know, I have unprocessed anger. And sometimes like Otto will do something and I realize my reaction is disproportionate to the situation. This is old shit that I have to work through. And it takes 12 minutes, and you use headphones. When you hear the sound on this side, you tap. When you hear it on this side, you tap. You hear it on both sides, you tap. And you feel the emotion as strongly as you can. So I'll rate it a 9 or a 10. And then 12, 15 minutes later, I'm like at peace. And it's not bypassing. It's not stuffing it down. It's working it through. And so that is incredible for someone who may not have someone. But I do think, especially if it's really bad, you don't know what's going to come up, and it could be very helpful. I would prefer to start with someone who I could do it hands-on with. So EMDR, what's SE?
Somatic Experiencing.
Okay.
is like a training method for somatic release for different therapists and social workers. And then SP is sensory motor psychotherapy.
Okay. And
And
NARM.
NARM is NeuroAffective Relational Model,
Okay.
which is more of like EMDR for chronic trauma or for like relational trauma, usually with people who grew up in a hostile family.
Mhm. Yeah. So do you find that people have the knowledge about how to live a healthy lifestyle? They have protocols, they have things, but they're not doing them. And maybe some of it comes from low self-worth or feeling like it's not going to work for me, or the belief systems. Like, how much do you think belief systems hold people back, even if they do have a lot to work with in front of them?
Almost entirely. It's like 80 to 90% of my practice. I mean, that's 80 to 90% of the reason why people see the doctor is because of stress. So if we're not learning how to address their conscious and unconscious stress, then we're doing them a disservice. So it's extremely important. Almost everybody knows what to do. They're just not doing it. And that's because of these limiting beliefs.
Yeah. And if you don't know how, then look into this, because that's been the thing that set me free. I was doing a lot of the same actions, but from the same energetic place. And you get such a different outcome when you can start to create that peace for yourself. And, one limiting belief I had was, if I had more money, then I'd be happy. I had whatever I wanted with auto the first 2 or 3 years, and I was still effing miserable. So I'm like, well, if I change this on my face, then I'll be happy. And eventually I'm like, it is an inside job. I just didn't know how. And these things are so amazing. So I'm grateful that you shared how common that is, because most people think it's hokey pokey, and that's been life-changing for me. And it sounds like for many people, as well.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, okay. I'm definitely excited to check out this Orpheus thing. And it sounds wonderful.
I love it. I love it. It's something where you can get certified, and I'm looking into that because I just use it with myself, but it's amazing. So I am so grateful. This was such a great conversation. We hit a lot of different things, and 2 questions. Any takeaways that you want to leave people with, and how can people work with you?
I have in my Instagram, Dr. Bradley Campbell, there's like a link in the bio where there's a wait list. I think there's drbradleycampbell.com as well. That has links to the memberships. There's like a $40 a month and a $100 a month option. The main difference with $100 one is you get a few other full-length thyroid and gut healing courses, and you get access to weekly Zoom calls with me and other people where you can ask more questions virtually, like visually back and forth. We can talk to each other. The $40 a month one, you can ask questions, but it's just in like a text form. Mm-hmm. So yeah, waitlist there. Follow me on Instagram or YouTube and TikTok. And then, just check things out. See if I feel like a good vibe. If you're still listening, thank you.
Yeah. Any takeaway that you feel like, of all the things we talked about, you'd want to reinforce?
Yeah. As far as I'm an Aquarius, so I like talking about death. So I think one of my dying patients said that the meaning of life for him became the balance of love and time. So that truly, to me, is the purpose of life. And you could translate that to be like God and time, I guess, as we talked about spirituality. But I think find what you love and the people you love, and spend your time doing and being with that. Yeah. That's really that's all it's about.
Well, thank you. And just from the time that I've met you, I just see you growing and changing. I know that I am too. And it's amazing to watch. And I wish, so much joy and success for you and your relationship. Maybe one day I'll get to meet your fiancé, but I appreciate you so much for being here today. And I'm sure the audience will love it. I sure did. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me on, Ashley. Love talking to you.
I love some citrine, and one of my favorite lines that they carry is Tata Harper. I've used this line for years, and my all-time favorite product that Tata Harper makes is the Regenerating Cleanser. So that is something that it's like this pinkish color, it's exfoliating, it smells so good, and I love to use that almost every day, but definitely on nights where I wear makeup, that's my go-to cleanser. So they're out of stock right now. Unfortunately, hopefully it'll be back because it's incredible. But I want to share some other favorites that I've discovered. And one is the Resurfacing Body Serum. Love to use it by itself. And then I also love the Revitalizing Body Oil.
So on their own, they're both great, but I found if I mix them together and put it on the skin, I love how that feels. So my code Ashley Taylor Wellness saves 10% at Citrine, and it includes the line Tata Harper. So normally their code only saves on your first order, but for my audience, they have been so generous and they will apply that discount to all orders. So definitely make sure to check it out. Link is in the show notes, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you for listening to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review, ideally a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge and really helps me to be able to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you have any feedback or guests that you'd like to have, I would love to hear from you so that I'm not just talking at you. I really want to deliver things that are valuable. So send me an email with any feedback, suggestions, or ideas for guests at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And I will leave you with a disclaimer. Please know that this is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.